Thank you, Sophia, and welcome everybody to the fifth chapter of our CFO Roundtable series. After the huge success across chemicals, FMCG, healthcare, and global business services, we present to you our CFO Roundtable, which focuses on engineering and heavy manufacturing. So, capital goods or heavy manufacturing as an industry serves as a very strong base for construction, infrastructure, automotive, consumer goods, and various other sectors. And today, we're fortunate to have with us some of the top leaders of this industry. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rajiv Batra, VP Finance at Cummins, Mr. Srini Srinivasan, he's the CFO and Executive Director at Bosch India, Mr. Sugata Sarkar, he's CFO at Schneider, and Mr. Anurag Bhagania is CFO at SKF India. Unfortunately, Kera from Siemens could not join us because he had a personal emergency last night. The discussion will be, however, moderated by Ravi Srivastava. Ravi heads the operation practice globally for BCG with industry focus on automotive, capital goods, and commodities. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Jyoti, and a very warm welcome to everyone. It's now been 5 months since the COVID crisis really hit China, and I think 2.5 months since we all had the Janta curfew across India. And I think COVID-19 is something which everybody now recognizes as probably the worst crisis that all of us have seen in our lifetimes. Unlike many other previous crises, which were either demand side driven because of, let's say, financial crisis or bank challenges, or they were driven by supply side disruptions because of natural disasters or localized unrest. This crisis is really unique because it has a demand side disruption as well as a supply side disruption hitting us simultaneously. And this pincer movement has created huge challenges across the board for all industries. And I think within the domain of industries, probably the engineering space covering automotive, discrete manufacturing has been one of the worst hit. If you look at sales in these sectors, automotive in May has been down almost 80% compared to last year. And frankly, if you look at scenarios going forward and forecasts going forward, is going to remain a challenge. So it's truly a crisis of unprecedented magnitude. And I would say it's also a crisis which doesn't really have a standard playbook which anybody could use on how to deal with it. Because I don't think any of us around the Zoom call really have an experience of something like this in our lifetimes. And that really makes it even more important to understand and hear perspectives and different voices from people who are at the center of this. And despite where the stock market seems to be going, which to me seems completely unrelated to what's happening in the real economy, while the uncertainty is high, I think there are a few things which are a given. First, I think overall demand pickup will take time. Consumer sentiment is low, people's incomes have been hit, and liquidity and financing in the market will remain tight for a while. So anybody expecting a very strong, sustained demand pickup, I think is being fairly optimistic. My personal view is demand pickup will take some time. Also, I think volatility and unpredictability in demand will continue to remain high. And all companies and businesses have to remain prepared to deal with these. Similarly, I think supply side disruptions are not going to go anywhere soon. While the lockdown has been lifted, companies are restarting operations. Fact of the matter is still we have a vaccine in place or a cure or herd immunity is developed, which itself will take a long time. The disease is not going anywhere. So we might still keep seeing localized breakouts, localized disruptions. And therefore, all companies need to be prepared for supply side disruptions and supply chain disruptions, at the very least for the next 18 to 24 months. Now, of course, for engineering companies, it clearly creates a big challenge. Auto is hit, but so are many other end user industries. And anybody who's supplying to other industries is also being hit because CapEx is getting delayed, CapEx cycles are getting extended. And therefore, engineering, I think, is really in the eye of the storm. Now, in this eye of the storm, the CFOs actually play a very seminal role. The way I see it, the CFOs are really the guardians of the financials of any company. So given both the P&L and the balance sheets are simultaneously under stress, how are the CFOs really looking at discharging their responsibilities in this situation becomes very critical. And it's great to have such an esteemed panel today to share their perspectives with us. And let me actually start getting them into the discussion. I think let me start with sort of a broader question. And Srini, you are, probably the most exposed to the automotive industry. And I know every OEM I've spoken to is looking at squeezing out suppliers even further, because obviously their financials are also under stress, right? So clearly the imperative for you to control and protect the P&L and strengthen the balance sheet at the same time is very high. So in this scenario, could you share with us what are some of the biggest focus areas that you have from a cost reduction perspective and protecting the balance sheet perspective?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is safe and healthy during this COVID times. In the automotive industry, we were already facing a downturn, and in a way, COVID times is just a top up, in a way you can say. And I almost relate this to any of us traveling in an aircraft, and we all know a difference between an air pocket and a turbulence. And I think we are in turbulent zone, and that's why the most important thing is to wear seatbelt. Second is put it on the oxygen mask. First put it on yourself, then put it on the child next to you, and that should be the order. And hence, from a CFO's perspective, I believe a CFO is both a finance guru and also a strategist. So it must be a balance of first managing the balance sheet, P&L will follow, but at the same time giving a direction to the company in terms of how to navigate through this turbulence. The way we have been following, I mean, this is a perfect storm in a way. We have all talked about VUCA. It's just that the VUCA has translated from PowerPoint charts into our doorstep. And that is what we are all trying to manage. And I think from a CFO perspective, it's very important to understand and differentiate between risk and uncertainty. Risk is manageable, can be mitigated. Uncertainty is unknown. And fearing and really understanding the art of navigating in unknown territories is most important. And that's why, first of all, managing the liquidity, managing the balance sheet. And I put the next steps in about 4 verticals. First to say survive, next revive, third is thrive, and fourth is sustain. And I believe that yes, while we will survive and revive, there is an opportunity in every crisis. And it's very important to look at those opportunities, segment your market, and then look at opportunities within those markets. In these periods of time, the way we have operated is to navigate this storm through nimblicity. Nimblicity is a combination of agility and simple. And hence the CFO must communicate very clearly, be decisive in the actions that we need to take, more so in financial terms as we go forward.
Great, thank you, Srini. Rajiv, if I may request you to build on what Srini has said and share your perspective.
Certainly. Thank you, Srini, for so aptly bringing it out. Right now, I think this turbulence has translated to a crash landing, right? The automotive industry anyway for the last 2 years was very troubled. And one thing is so certain now, that the only certainty we have is uncertainty. We have no predictions at this point, intelligent, factor-driven, signal-driven predictions about when the demand is going to come back. So if we had something to react to, which says, I know it's going to be 2 quarters, and then I can see light at the end of the tunnel. Unfortunately, how long the tunnel today is a matter of gesticulation, and therefore on that we've given up. Say, when does the auto industry come back? There is also the emission norms. BS4 have leapfrogged to BS6, which is also something which is creating complications. The product has certainly gone up. So on one side, prices have gone up, The other side, the supply chain has become very uncertain. And the consumer, therefore, are exercising a choice which says, I'll buy when I really need to buy, and let me hold on to my cash. Which, placing yourself in the position of a customer, is very justified and rational behavior. So right now, the biggest priority that a CFO has is really conserving cash, dealing with the uncertainty up until we can move ahead somewhere close to previous models, previous volumes before we shut down. Because remember, shutting down is very easy. You can do it in the space of a matter of hours. But when you have to come back and ramp up, the ramp up is where every faculty of a CFO is challenged. The dealers and distributors, the channel is struggling. They have inventory, cash concerns. Come to your suppliers, they've been troubled by all sorts of regulations. And interpreting the regulations also has been quite complex. They've been moving from time to time. And if you need supplies, the suppliers look at you for help. Your own business is certainly hunkered down and awaiting the reflexes and the nimbleness, which you spoke about, of how do you move this day to day and yet keep on track. So the challenge is uncertainty that we are dealing with and all that comes with it. Back to you, Ravi.
Thanks, Rajiv. Maybe if I were to start diving in deeper, and Saugata, if I could ask you. So firstly, Rajiv, I'll come back to your point around the ecosystem, because that's very critical in the restart. But maybe if I were to keep you within your organizational boundaries for a minute, you spoke about serving cash, right? Now, given that sales volumes are still not picking up, the only way to sort of preserve profitability is to bring down costs, both the variable side as well as the fixed cost. So Saugata, what are some of the initiatives that you have driven from a cost perspective, whether it's in procurement or manufacturing or indirect cost? Where do you believe the biggest focus and opportunity is in the short term to control costs?
Thank you, Ravi, and good afternoon to everyone. So let's start with the short term, because right now, as Srini and Rajiv rightly said, is that we are in a kind of a reaction mode, and we're trying to deal with the situation which has suddenly befallen for the last 2.5 months. So the first kind of approach is response. So the immediate things that we are doing is to bring down the costs in the immediate term, because revenues have been badly hit, as you said. Although in our industry, there's a slight difference with the auto industry. In the auto industry, the demand has been hit fundamentally. In our industry, which is energy management products, solution services, industrial automation, the underlying demand in most cases remain. It's basically the activities which have got hit and deferred. So the revenue has been hit very, very sharply. But nevertheless, the ultimate impact is the same, because the P&L is impacted. So the immediate cost. Now, what we're doing immediately are taking tactical steps, so to say, so that we have an immediate impact of whatever we are doing. So if you think about costs, if you start from the production side, the variable costs will vary to an extent with the activities going down, but there would be overheads which will be partially unabsorbed. And this will have to be mitigated by reduction in indirect costs. That's the way we look at it. So if you go into indirect costs, few of the things that we are looking at, I mean, one is of course the manpower cost. Now in manpower cost, we have postponed increments, promotions, etc. But more importantly, for the last 1 or 2 years, we have started redeploying our organization in a way to make it much more efficient. So that is giving us the benefit now, especially in the net, because there is no increase in the cost, because we have postponed promotions, new hires, and increments. So manpower is one big factor. The other thing which is giving us immediate cost reduction is travel. Obviously, last 2 months, there was hardly any travel. But even when we start up, we have decided to keep travel at a minimum and used digital connect more. And this I'll talk about more as we go into the structural areas of the savings. The other thing is events. Now we have several product solutions. We go through different channels. We have several segments we serve. And in the organization also, we have several business divisions. So there are a lot of events which take place typically in our company with different segments, channels, customers, and also internally. So we've cut all this out. And for the rest of the year also, we're going to go completely digital. So we'll be doing digital webinars, which we have started doing heavily over the last 1.5 months or so, and cut down all our event costs. So this is giving us some immediate savings. The other thing is advertisement and promotions. Now, all the advertisement and promotion which are product specific or activity specific are cut down drastically. Again, we are leveraging our digital marketing tools more in reaching the customer and the market in general than spending specifically on advertisement and promotion for specific activities. Besides that, also we are looking at lease costs. I mean, our facilities, our commercial and plant facilities all over the country, we've approached the landlords and requested them for partial waivers or reduction in lease rents. And in many cases, in fact, I would say in most cases, landlords have responded positively. We're also looking at all our service costs, especially the larger consultants that we use, the services that we take. And there again, we have gone to them and requested for reduction of rates for this year. And as I said, I mean, I keep seeing these are short-term tactical measures that we take to manage the P&L in the immediate term. And again, in most cases, we have very positive responses from people who render services to us, be they consultants or other kinds of services. So these are some immediate steps that we have taken, but we are very conscious that these are responsive steps. These are tactical, and there have to be fundamental shifts and structural changes for the longer term to sustain, which we can talk about subsequently. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Saugata. I would just request, please go easy on the consultants. But maybe Anurag, if I might come to you, Saugata spoke about a set of levers that are quite valuable in the short term and can get immediate value. I think more fundamentally, many companies would also be looking at this as an opportunity to fundamentally change their cost structures, get to a much lower break even, right? So if you were to go beyond, let's say, just the next quarter or 2 quarters and look at from a longer term perspective, what are the structural cost elements that you feel companies could focus on and get value out of? Anurag, you're on mute.
Thanks, Ravi, and good afternoon, everyone. I really like what Srini talked about, the airplane model and hitting the air pockets and getting into turbulence zone. I think the time is that we give the controls from autopilot now to the drivers, which is us, and we have this responsibility in our hands. I see this as a challenge, and at the same time, like Rajiv, you talked about creating opportunities out of these challenges, exactly the same way we are looking at it. I think the response from a CFO is in 3 levels. First is at an organizational level, then there is at a functional level, and then of course there is at a personal level. Each of these will call for really going down deep and understanding, what are the structural changes that you will have to do. And I will focus right now on the organizational level structural changes. But of course, there's much more in terms of the function, in terms of the personal leadership. You will have to really pull out and demonstrate. At an organizational level, just going back to your strategy. And I'm talking this more from the standpoint of what we have done and what we have seen making it work. We laid out a strategy just about 8 to 9 months back. We have fast-tracked implementation of that strategy very, very significantly. And, a lot of big leaders around the world are saying, transformation, what was happening in about 15 years or 10 years is happening in 2 months, is exactly the case that we are seeing, and I'm certain about many of my colleagues here. We've so the broad pockets. First is looking at innovation in our products. Over the last 2 months, products which were supposed to be innovated for, let's say, 6 months down, we've crashed down the cycle times, looking at the product relevance and bringing down the launch much earlier, trying to digitalize the entire sales platform, looking at new ways of doing business, creating a huge ecosystem around customer experience, chatbots. These are things as an organization we were thinking like 2 years or 3 years down the line. This opportunity that last 2 months created for us is a structural shift from what we were doing. We are truly embracing the new world order. We are embracing the new ways of doing things, and not just finding new normal. We are creating new normal for ourselves as an organization as well as the people for us. Back to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Anurag. I wanted to come back to a point, Rajiv, that you had made, and I can see a lot of questions coming up on the Q&A as well, around the ecosystem management. And maybe let me make the question a little sharper and specific from a CFO perspective. You spoke about cash preservation as an imperative for companies, but there's also the perspective that how do we take care of our channel partners, our suppliers, because the stress is everywhere, right? And if your suppliers go bust, then you can't restart your supply chain, right? Now, some of this sort of becomes, at conflict with each other. So how do you manage your payables, while conserving cash, right? Also, I'm sure many of your customers are delaying payments, right? So how do you push for payments and manage your receivables? So both the payable and receivable side is a challenge. And similarly, from a working capital perspective, I'm sure even internally, your production teams and sourcing teams would be saying, look, we need to work with higher inventory levels because supplies can get disrupted, our production will stop, and therefore working capital goes up, right? So in a way, as the CFO, you are at the center of it, trying to manage receivables, payables, inventory, while making sure my entire ecosystem is still, preserved in a way. So how are you actually dealing with this sort of pincer movement that you are facing?
Yeah, I just complete that question on and then I'll move to this question because cost is pretty dear to us, right? So right now, any AOP or any operating plan you had is not worth the electronic media or paper it is written on. So things have so drastically moved on. So you're managing month to month, quarter to quarter. And therefore, every element of cost has to be questioned. In the good days, when we looked at cost reduction, you were marginally tweaking, fitting into the operating plan and saying, okay, I lost so much revenue, how can I cut back on expenses? But this, like Anurag says, is really something very structural. And to embrace a completely different way of doing business, including work from home, which companies are seriously looking at. But every element of cost, therefore, has to be questioned. Why are we doing it this way? Why do we need it? What's a better way of doing it? And over time, as the company has gone on over several years, business units, because all of us are from MNCs, and MNCs follow the business unit structure. Business units have found their own resources to fix a lot of their own issues because every business unit wants to be able to direct their own resources, which therefore creates a lot of cost in the organization. Can you therefore look at it centrally to see if a central organization at this stage were to service this, how much cost could you pull out? So that's a structural element we've also looked at. So one is every element of cost, then structural decisions on how are you going to organize in the short term. And the other balance I do want to put in here is that as leaders and CFOs, you've got to maintain the balance as well. Because at some point in time, business will come back, and you don't want to dismantle something to such an extent that reviving that could be another challenge by itself. So you don't destroy what you have, but sort of structurally change things around, different way of business, and be on a holding pattern using the same air terminology which Srini brought in. So remain on a holding pattern and keep afloat. So that's the sort of cost perspective I did want to complete. Now on the ecosystem, you know, that same thing, cash is king, cash is emperor now, you heard many, many times. So I will not repeat that. But cash is the biggest challenge, whether it is stuck in inventory, whether it is stuck in receivable, whether it is stuck in channel partners not being able to pay you. And these channel partners have been around for years. So it's not that they're being opportunistic in any. The fact is, inventory never moved. Your working capital cycles, a lot of stuff was on the high seas, which has certainly come when the ports opened. So you focus on cash. So, and then, like you said, the supply chain. Now, supply chain to be responsive, because let's say what we produce is engines. And any one part which is not available for that duration would mean an incomplete engine and revenue which you can't recognize or dispatch. So it's useless. So you now have to start working with all your suppliers, understanding what the individual issues are. Starting from regulatory clearances for the supply base so that they can start back. Make funding available by talking with them to their banks and comfort to the banks that this is a genuine order and you should entertain this request. Because in the interim, what has happened is in these 2 months, banks have certainly seen huge risks in current lending. And they've choked up all forms of lending. If you see, despite the reverse repo coming to something like 3.45, the amount of cash which goes into the reverse repo from the banks is mind-boggling. So one perspective is really sort of encourage lending is something which still has to be optimized. And so you walk with your bankers to their bankers, provide comfort, and start working on the supply base. As well as at times provide them internal funding from within the company though at a cost, if you have those resources. We have them, so we've done it. So I think really injecting liquidity into all forms of lagging your receivable from your customer, which is the channel, helping your supplier, and at the same time surviving on your own and collecting sharply, and again, not killing the golden goose, because finally your channel partners are also in some form your responsibility, and we are larger corporates. So a long-winded answer, Ravi, but I did want
long-winded, Rajiv, and what I'm hearing is you are saying there is no easy answer. Huh?
There is no easy answer to this.
You have to balance all the trade-offs.
The one last part which I left out was the inventory. Supply chain people love inventory. They need to put their arms around as much inventory as possible so that they can sleep at peace at night. Those days are gone. Whether it's just in time, line side delivery, you just got to optimize and actually work with supply chain and say, hey, no longer 45 days, come down to 15 days. So back to you.
Yeah. So maybe Srini, I wanted your perspective also on this ecosystem question, and maybe taking your own aircraft analogy. The announcement is whenever turbulence hits, oxygen masks will fall. And if you're traveling with a child, first put on your own mask and then put the mask on the child, right? Now, in this case, if I were to use that analogy and say that your supply chain ecosystem is the child you are traveling with, how would you do it? Put on your own mask and take the risk that maybe the child will drop off the lap? or try and do both simultaneously? How would you look at managing the ecosystem in this scenario?
So the way I have tried to navigate through this turbulence is really put together some sort of an approach, as I said in the starting: survive, revive, thrive, and sustain. So survive, it's all about looking after myself, my balance sheet, my cash position, liquidity, my people, and all of that. And that's been the first phase. Though we have ensured that the people in our ecosystem are also taken care of, migrant labor, and that's been our CSR angle and all that, our commitment to society. But having said that, quite quickly in May, we have moved into the revive zone, where we are now ensuring that the kid next to us has got the oxygen mask. So most of our suppliers, we have put them on supplier financing with banks, and where they leverage our credit rating at a much lower cost, given the liquidity and the rates in the market. Leveraging our credit rating and our sort of interest rate, it's of a great benefit to them. But having said that, I think an important element is also that the strength of our supply chain is in its weakest link. And that's where, especially when we are supplying parts, a nut or a bolt supplier may not be, he may be in a hot zone and he's not able to start. And as panelists said that, yes, whether it's on regulatory or permission or cash flows or even migrant labor training, there has been a very clear protocol to ensure that how do we bring them back and let them thrive. So there has been a very clear action with our supply chain colleagues to bring this. And I think even when we talk about ecosystem, there is this concept of resilience. And if you look at the dictionary definition of resilience, is the ability to bounce back amidst great difficulty. And the degree of ability, or the degree and the ability to bounce back, varies for different people, depending upon the muscle and the capability that each has. And this has to be done, each member of that ecosystem. We have businesses where Cummins are our customers. We make sure that, yes, we are getting the payments on time, we can get our cash flows moving. But at the same time, we have customers like dealers in our power tools business and others who are small. And many of them, we have to ensure that, yes, we are providing them the extra credit facility and cash infusion for the business cycle to start. And that's what we are currently focusing on. So as a CFO, we have to hold the reins, or as Anurag also mentioned, that you can't let the business go on autopilot. You have to hold charge and navigate it, and horses for courses. You can't have one rule that's applicable to all your businesses, but you have to navigate. And I think the biggest learning for me is to don't sit in your chamber, but move around the organization, understand where the problems are, where the opportunities are, and be decisive and clear in your decision making, and be external to the organization. I think right through work from home, every day, I've ensured that I've talked to at least 5 suppliers and 3 customers to understand where the problem is and bring that insight into our board as we shape our own future.
Thank you, Srini. Very helpful. So I think
Ravi, if I were to offer a comment.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ravi, this is Anurag. I just wanted to offer a comment. And this is just building on what Srini and Rajiv said. And it's unfortunate. I mean, there is no intent, but we are using the airplane analogy where the times are most difficult for the people in the airline industry, but it's a very appropriate example, and therefore I'm building on it. If there was ever a time when we had the responsibility of keeping our co-pilots engaged in how the flight will function, this is it. There is no peanut butter approach. There is absolutely no percentage methodology that will work. If you go with your cost problem to participants who are your co-pilots, you will come up with much smarter, much relevant, much practical, and much more sustainable outcomes. I know what CFOs should do, but I do want to make a point that what they should not do, if they sit in their offices and try to make a business decision based on their judgment and applying a certain standard methodology, that will certainly fail. So, just wanted to bring that point.
Absolutely, Anurag. I think the key point is really getting out there, rolling up your sleeves and engaging deeply with all parts of the organization. And I think the second big insight I took away is segmentation. You literally have to take decisions on a segment of one. There is no standard template. Every supplier, every customer is different, and you need to understand the context for that decision. I'll come back to another point that I think Anurag, you or Sugata had made about, in this period also making sure we are not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? So there is obviously focus on cash preservation, but at some point of time, the business will revive, right? And it will start thriving. And therefore, as you are cutting costs, as you are sort of tightening your belts, making sure you are still continuing to invest in those areas which are critical for your long-term sustenance, long-term competitiveness is very important. So, like for example, there's a question on how are engineering companies managing the R&D budget, right? Now, R&D is one part which has a longer-term perspective. There will be other investments also that all companies would be making. So, in this period, how are you, as the CFO, sort of holding your ground, and in a way also ensuring that the company doesn't lose sight of the longer-term objectives and you continue to invest in areas that are important? How are you managing that trade-off? So, Sugata, maybe if I could ask you to come in and share your thoughts first.
So this is a very pertinent question, Ravi, and thank you for that, because this is really, really, really pertinent. The whole approach that we are taking right now is to prepare for the comeback. And even the ecosystem question that you asked earlier. So our approach, and that's, I think, also some of the things that Rajiv talked about, is our approach also is to ensure a strong partnership with suppliers, vendors, as well as with our channel partners in this time. Now, cash is king, we preserve cash, etc. But we know that we are going to be negative in cash for the next 3 months or so, and we plan for that. But it's important for us to pay, especially our small vendors, on time. It's important to extend a hand to the partners, the channel partners that we deal with, and we've done it in various ways. In some ways, we have extended credit terms. In some ways, we worked with bank to give them better rates, give them moratorium. So some of the things cost us money, some of the things we use a relationship. But importantly, this is the same time where we need to invest as well. You talked about R&D. I'm also going to talk about digitization, because some of the structural changes that we are making now, and it's much more exciting and interesting to think about changing the business model wherever we can, changing the organization delivery model wherever we can, rather than talking about cutting costs, which we've done. We're done with it. That was a response mode. Now we are thinking about what can we transform, and quickly, with quick wins. And if you think about that, one of the major things that we are working about is the whole process of selling, right? From identifying a potential customer. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so identify a potential customer, to the whole process of nurturing the customer, making the influencing work, pricing, negotiation, and sale. This whole process, if you map, you'll find that there are a lot of digital tools which you can use along with the human interaction today. It will never be fully digital, but in areas or phases where we are nurturing or we are influencing, there can be a heavy use of digital technology, where, let us say, 4 or 5 people from the organization were going because you needed experts from different fields to pitch to a big customer. There can be one human interface connecting with experts across the organization, making demonstration using virtual reality, giving him a plant tour virtually, demonstrating the product or the solution virtually, and then closing a deal. Now, this is something that we're investing on. This is the kind of digital technology we're investing on. We're investing on digital marketing tools. And then coming to R&D, R&D is very strong for us. It's very strong for Schneider Electric. In fact, India is a big base for Schneider Electric globally for R&D. And there is no let up on that. I mean, there the continuous effort is to see how fast you can come up with innovative products, especially which are required. In fact, there are certain product variants which are coming out which cater to the current necessity. We have a work from home kit now. So, those remain focus areas. There is no let up on investments there. In fact, the savings that we have from some of the structural changes that we make are going to go into investments like digital technology. They're going to investments of creating dashboards which will help people to decide faster, giving tools to the sales force which are collaborative tools on platforms, etc. So that's very much the focus now for us, Ravi.
Okay, thank you for that. I think your point on digital transformation is a very pertinent one, and I wanted to maybe just check if any of the other panelists wants to comment on that. And you're right. I think that's one of the key areas where all companies are focusing and using the crisis to drive and accelerate digital transformation. So, would any of the panelists, Srini, would you want to, or maybe Rajiv, if you want to come in, and then Srini, you could come in.
I just give you a very simple example. Let's take our service business. My business is extensive people feet on the street. And in the past, they've been visiting on a periodic basis all of the installations in the field. Now, A is expensive. B, it's not always going to be possible to keep adding feet on streets as your equipment in the field grows. So you're making the equipment itself transmit digital signals which are captured at a central control room. And on a predictive model, your field force can turn up to make some, not a break fix, but an anticipatory change of what is likely to fail. So really you're taking feet on street away and replacing that with digital tools, which will then make your people way more productive and less exposed to what's going on outside. Because we started this talk by saying the outside is not fixed as yet. It will take at least another 12 to 14 months before the risk is totally behind us. So that's one other way. And the other way I think all of us are working is how do you not turn up at a customer's place to make the pitch and it's digitally done? Because we extensively deal with the government in several projects. And what we are seeing now is openness even within the government on presentations and being able to ask the relevant questions and having a team on the side. So business in the last 1 month still going on, but there's a different way of doing it now. So just thought I'd just complete the digital part. Back to you.
Srini, if you could come in and maybe also talk a little bit about will there be greater focus on automation and reduction on or reduced dependence on manpower in this entire period, which also in a way changes the competitive driver historically for India in manufacturing, which has been driven more by manpower costs. So do you see some of those trends also playing out?
Yes, and just to start with, I just wanted to make 2-3 points here. I mean, for each one of us or in our own system, you have good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. So similarly, in costs, you have good costs and bad costs. So we have tried to address the bad costs through transformation. You are aware, Ravi, that we have launched zero-based budgeting in a very big way, and it's a very structural shift. And we have been able to get at least 16% of the cost base out, both on the pricing side and on the consumption side. Similarly, we've had a zero-based organization to look at structures again and have a mechanism of restructure, reskill, and redeploy. And redeploy is where our businesses are getting more digital and for which you need reskilling. And much of the financing for the reskilling has also come from a zero-based budgeting approach that we have taken. Coming back to digital, I see a digital in two halves. One is digitizing the internal processes, and second is digital business models itself. And on digital processes, let me give you an example of demand generation. I think today in this period, demand volatility demand volatility is our biggest challenge, whether it is a distributive trade or whether it's our OEMs in our automotive sector. So they're really understanding demand. So we have gone right up to Vahan database connected that we have done modeling along with the startup to really look at GDP, the corresponding factors, drivers, agricultural growth and its implication on tractor growth, the stimulus, and establish correlation and weightages to each and predicting the different scenarios so that we can have a good understanding of how the demand is going to be. Then translate that into S&OP so that our planning cycles can become much shorter and we can work in much shorter cycle and there is transparency of data and what's happening at the front end. On the digital business model side, we believe that there is a very big opportunity that is coming on the digital mobility side. So if you take the whole sector of corporate mobility or mobility, the use of apps, whether it's on vehicle maintenance, whether it's on driver assistance, or whether it's on parking, there are multiple opportunities where we can build a very big business given our technology and understanding of the automotive sector. So our strategy has been to focus on the bad cholesterol, take the cost out and put a funding mechanism to your question on R&D, new business model to incubate, accelerate and grow some of our digital business models for the future.
Thank you, Srini. Anurag, any thoughts from you on what, picking up on Srini's analogy of good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, what are some of the things that you would classify as good cholesterol in this phase?
Yeah, so, Srini's example was great. I will give you another example that is really live for us and meaningful. Organizations like SKF and many of our co-panelists here, we have, significant history. And with this kind of organizations, we generally tend to develop our organization in different parts in different ways and end up creating a complex ecosystem of technology. I think there is nobody on this panel today who can boast of an Amazon-like customer experience. You click, you make some queries and you get a response that you made this order this day. Here is where your shipment is. This is when it will get delivered to you. A simple thing like that. I have at least 7 different systems that people interface with to respond to a customer query. And it's very manual. This is a perfect example of a bad cholesterol. We've created a automation, a bot who is going to take this query, run it past all the different 7 systems and get you a response in 30 seconds. This used to take about 5 to 7 minutes per query. And with the number of queries, you can imagine how much waste we were creating. We are dealing with 2 problems here. One is how to reduce the pain of the customer, how to reduce the effort of the organization, and really, as a result, better experience. And obviously it will call for a cost, but those are the costs that you will like to make. The reduced demand actually gives us an opportunity to refocus our effort on spending on expansion for more production to spending on development for getting our business smarter. So that's the response.
Maybe just sort of tunneling into the role of digitization for the finance function. How do you see it changing, let's say, the office of the CFO? And there are many things which are, I would say, historically have been very difficult to, let's say, do work from home on, right? Some parts of the finance function, like, let's say, an auditing or whatever, right? But how do you see this entire digitization wave? You've spoken about selling, you've spoken about supply chain, etc. How do you see digitization impacting finance function? And do you see the COVID crisis actually changing the way of working for the finance function? So Veda, maybe if I may ask you to come in, and then Rajiv, I'll ask comment after that as well.
Okay, so there are several ways Ravi, and let me talk about a couple, because there are several ways. I mean, one is, of course, which is, I suppose, the most talked about, is bringing in efficiency in finance shared service kind of setups, where you use RPAs and bots and bring in efficiency basically. But there is also a couple of other areas. One is the use of dashboards, for instance. The use of dashboards which will sit on top of a sort of a data lake or data warehouse which you have, where the underlying is your ERPs. So the base information coming from the ERPs, and also possibly from other allied systems like the CRM system, for instance. And then you have the database there from which you create some dashboards with which you can actually get much more insights than you ever got using your traditional MIS reports, right? And there are examples that we are seeing every day in pricing, certain insights that we are getting. We get insights on the sales to cost ratios and that kind of thing. So this is, pushing the finance organization in a way to develop skills of actually understanding and analyzing data rather than just preparing data. So that is one area which I see is already shifting, and is going to be an area of massive shift for the CFO's office, because you move away and you clearly differentiate between resources who generate data and resources who are able to analyze and then interact and engage with business, with the outside world, in taking actions which are required, which come out of that analysis. The other area where digitization can be used is risk management. So you can use tools which will be used for controls, for audits, as also for analyzing contracts, for instance. So and in project controlling also as an example. So these are areas where digitization can be used. I'm not even going into the use of AI for forecasting of sales, etc. Those are the next steps, of course. But even before going there, use of simple dashboards, use of simple automation tools, use of tools which will help in reconciliation and closing off, very basic things like intercompany reconciliation, schedules for closing, so that you close your books fast, get the data out, analyze it, use it for the business engagement and business actions, and use it for risk management. Those are clear areas where, there's potential for immediate shift. And even with auditing, you mentioned auditing, can we do it remotely? Lockdown has really pushed us, and because this is the time and a lot of audits are happening, and the discussions with auditors are very interesting. And as you keep kind of taking it apart and saying, okay, what can we not do? Then what finally comes out is, okay, I cannot do physical verification of assets. I cannot do physical verification of inventory. What else can I not do digitally? And you'll find that in today's world, there are very few things. So it's very interesting. I think it's accelerating that shift.
I think Saugata makes a very, very important point, and is something for young CFOs and professionals to focus on. I think it is about translating information to insights for fast decision making, and you need that in this COVID world. And using tools like Power BI and Tableau, using the data lake capability for fast decision making to bring analysis to the board. I mean, traditionally we have got periodicity of reports which once a month or once a quarter or once a week, and we cannot live with the periodicity of once a week anymore. So really developing that information layer in terms of a data lake, and then using tools like Power BI or Tableau is very, very important, and that's a big opportunity.
I think maybe one other lens I wanted to get inputs on is every crisis is also a great opportunity, right? And if I were to maybe think of two potential opportunity areas, one is with valuations getting hit in a lot of places. There will always be companies with weak balance sheets and good balance sheets, right? And in BCG, we do this classic predator versus prey analysis. So in every crisis, you will have some companies who have the option of being predators, and there are others who are preys, right? So how do you think for as CFOs potential, and I don't want to comment on where any of you are or your companies are, but for companies which potentially think of them, might find themselves being in a vulnerable situation, what role can CFOs play to protect against unwanted acquisition offers? And similarly, how do you look at potential opportunities for acquisitions in this scenario? Anurag, you want to start maybe?
Yeah, I can do that, Ravi. The question has both dimensions as if I reflect back on your question. It is about how do we look at the opportunity, and that's the one that I will focus at. Clearly, it is opening new opportunities without a doubt. I at least now have 7 or 8 potential opportunities that we are talking about, we are evaluating, we are looking at synergies, which we probably in the last 1 or 2 years we never thought about, because the valuations have become really attractive. They've gone at least 50% more, more attractive than what it was earlier. The other part of your question is actually the one that is really relevant for a CFO to make sure that he works with the promoter. He works in understanding the value, the inherent value of the organization, and not getting biased by the current valuation levels. It may be looking very exciting at this moment to, cash out. But if you have a good business model, if you have your pulse at the customer demand, if you have a technology edge that you want an appropriate valuation for, you will have to make sure that that kind of understanding around the valuation of the enterprise is pretty well understood at an organizational level, so that you don't fall prey to that. But clearly, that is an opportunity that is emerging for most of the CFOs at this time. I doubt if there are any transactions, though. There is a lot of talk, but there is not many transactions that we've heard about. Okay.
Rajiv, do you have a perspective? And maybe before you come in, Anurag, just as a quick point on very few transactions, I can tell you, basis research we have done, transactions that are done in the middle of a crisis always end up creating more value for the acquirer than those that are done at a peak. And it's not rocket science, it's straightforward. You buy at a lesser valuation and you will make more money, right? So, and if you look at the 2008 crisis also, once that crisis ended, during the crisis, the volume of M&A activity had fallen significantly, and then it suddenly shot up because everybody is sort of keeping powder dry, but then they will come in as soon as you see signs of an upturn. But Rajiv, would be interesting to hear your thoughts as well on this.
Just to add, during this time, deals happen, but they are not publicized. People say that "Jada mat bolo, nazar lag jayega."
I think right now the emphasis is on managing your business more than seriously looking at big acquisitions. So if there are small acquisitions which you can easily digest and they make sense for your business, and we are going through one of those as we speak. So it's an allied field which really integrates very well into our business, one of our businesses. So that is in fact being accelerated because we believe we'll get much better value than we were getting about a year back. So anything which we really need, what we are focusing on. And on protecting ourselves, we're very watchful ever so often to ensure how much cash you have on the balance sheet and how do you manage that cash so that you don't fall prey to somebody who's looking at an acquisition. The more cash you have on the balance sheet means you're more likely as an acquisition target. So you have to watch these things. So it's the buy side of the business, which is what do we really need, and if it's available at a very good price is what we would pursue right now. Back to you, Ravi.
And I would say in our case, as you know, my share price at its peak was 21,000. Now it's 11,000. So I'm always watching behind my back to say that is there a predator around me. So, but having said that, I mean, while we have talked about inorganic growth or inorganic opportunities, I want to just provide some insights on the broader opportunity. And that's where, as multinationals, I see a big opportunity between high-cost country, low-cost country, that equation. Many of the holy grails for multinational, wherever each of us are headquartered, nothing can change. It's all now breaking, and people are really looking at why can't this be done in a low-cost country, in an automated, agile way. That's one big opportunity for us. The second big opportunity is the China Plus opportunity. To say that, yes, given what we are seeing and the ecosystem or the environment which China has built around it, to really say that many companies are saying, how do we reduce our exposure to China on one side? And secondly, how do we almost future-proof our supply chain by having alternate supply base in other countries other than China? Of course, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and India are all playing on a common field, and we have to be competitive. But that's where, I mean, I'm part of a national task force on MSMEs to really say how can MSME become the robust, competitive foundation for India for the future. And there I see big opportunities for MSMEs to be the Chinese small, medium-sized supplier of the future as a supplier to the globe. And these are the two big opportunities, and many of our own supplier base are being exposed, and we are helping them grab that opportunity.
Ravi, I wanted to add one more comment, not so much on the M&A, but on this opportunity, what is more exciting right now, or what is right here and right now emerging as a real opportunity, is building partnerships. There are lots of discussions that at least I am aware of our organization really looking at very positively, is to build partnerships around both the sell side as well as the buy side. And when I say partnerships could be around sharing of go-to-market strategy, as an example. How do you leverage the footprint that we have? How do you leverage the 1,000+ channel and distributors that Cummins has, or for example, Bosch has? And how can we co-create an ecosystem which can make value for both the partners? And that's really something that is emerging as a big opportunity, because there is pressure on cost, there is uncertainty of demand, and people are willing and looking at those opportunities very, very positively.
Yeah. Ravi, I'd like to add on this point on the M&A side, of course, as far as the company is concerned, as you would know, we are about to do a very large acquisition, which was announced much before the lockdown. So that's as far as the company is concerned, and that shows the interest of the group in investing heavily in the country. And apart from that, we have a very large manufacturing base in India, and we are seeing opportunities even through this period where even during the lockdown, the domestic sale was impacted. Exports were to an extent going on. But if I step back and think about it as a citizen and a professional of this in this country, I think in the MSME sector, there would be good opportunities for consolidation. I think Srini was talking about it. So I was thinking at the time that this is a sector where there should be some consolidation so that value is created, there is more agility in the system, and there is more capability, in dealing with really high-class manufacturing.
Fair point. Maybe this could be a point we could ask for an audience poll, and I'm just hearing on chat that I've busted through 2 other poll questions that had been planned. But maybe Sophia, if you could come in and...
Sure, Avi. So we've got a poll question up on the screens right now. And the question is, what are the areas you think India needs to work on to seize the opportunity to move manufacturing to India? The first option is upskilling. Secondly, government regulations need to become manufacturing friendly. Third, marketing India better to the parent company and thereby creating more buy-in. And lastly, improving infrastructure. So for those of you who haven't voted, if you can just vote now, that would be great. We'll leave the poll open for another 10 seconds or so. We also have received a few questions in the Q&A box, which is great. Thank you for all of you who submitted questions. For those of you who haven't, you might want to pop in your questions now. Or you can also take a look at the other questions that the other attendees posted, and then also give a thumbs up to those questions that you like answered as well. All right, thank you for voting. I'll close the poll now.
Sophie, I was just wondering whether you have an option which says all of the above.
Unfortunately not, but I'm sure some are in agreement with you. So the most popular answer is government regulations need to become manufacturing friendly at 53%. What does the panelist group think?
I think so, because again, as a part of MSME workforce, we analyzed how many regulations that a small and micro or small enterprise has to go through to operate in India. It is 287 regulations it has to navigate through to be able to do a business in India, out of which there are 97 rules for which the penalty is going to jail. So criminalization of regulations, that there are 97 out of some 247 where you could go to jail. So one of our first recommendation is to decriminalize all of these regulations, and says that yes, every state can have 50 and you choose which 50 you want, and hopefully there is some synergy around it. I agree to the opinion of the group.
Yeah, I think it's very clear. Let the government ease things out and build infrastructure, and I think everything else will take care of itself.
But having said that, we are working with Karnataka government and Punjab government. I think there's a very positive momentum, at least for the first time I'm seeing from the government side, to take some big actions.
Yeah,
I think if you look at the scenarios, and let's say you want to set up an industry, the number of hoops that you have to jump through and the number of clearances before you can actually start. So many departments come calling, and anything late could be as serious as they want to make it. The amount of discretion which any regulatory authority has today to shut you down, that has to be looked at, right? And instead of encouraging, sort of not there as yet. The encouragement mode needs to get more encouraged. If entrepreneurship is what's going to address the unemployment problem in this country, we are not there as yet. So that's sort of what I would look at. Certainly regulations, but the way this whole thing is being approached could change.
right. So I'm just conscious of time as well. So I've been trying to look at the questions and pick some of those. There are a few I'll pick out from the chat and just place. There is one which is around the treasury strategies specifically. So are you as CFOs, what are some of the big treasury strategies, and are there changes in the investment strategies that you're looking at given the current market volatility? Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, I can comment on that. So treasury strategy, since you talked about the investment side, I'll talk about both. So on the investment side, we believe our treasury is basically for the business. So we try to keep our money safe. And yeah, these times we are even more careful in that context. So we keep it in the safest of investments, I mean, apart from bank deposits, other very safe investments. In terms of the funding side, because I had earlier commented that we know that we are going to be cash negative over the next 2-3 months as far as the monthly generation is concerned, because we do want to support the ecosystem. So, so how do you use the cash? So the way we prioritize is that we obviously first use our available funds, then we use our short-term borrowings. But before using short-term borrowings, we use all the funds which are possible from within the group. So I have several entities operating in India, several companies and businesses. So we try to use our own funds. So basically using equity in some ways before turning to debt. And when you turn to debt, we first turn to short-term debt. But the overall approach is keep the money safe and borrow in the very short term. Even though when the companies borrow, we try to borrow from the other companies in the group. And then if I have to grow outside the group, it is a very short-term borrowing. So a conservative strategy in a way.
So Gatha, is your strategy really changed in times of COVID? I'm just building on that question, because I was actually wanting to respond to Ravi saying that my strategy pre-COVID and post-COVID strategies don't change. And
Yes.
exactly the case for Treasury. It's just the returns are changing, but the strategy are pretty, you preserve capital.
Yeah,
That's the way I
absolutely, you're right. So the strategy, overlying strategy doesn't change. Only I look at it more frequently these days to see what's happening, That's it.
But there's been one change. There's been one change. And this was actually driven for one of our companies by the overseas collaborator. And they just felt that the hunker down on all forms of lending. And therefore, why should we not make the drawing and park it in the current account somewhere else? So, because as you publish outlooks and forecasts, there's a certain degree of risk which you're projecting. And if a management is very risk averse, and they expect that that forecast, especially the automotive side, is going to create some panic in the banking circles, the banks may not lend to you. And this was isolated. But when I checked around, I did find that a few of the mid-sized to small-sized companies had actually done that. So that was one change which I thought I'd point out, that they were willing to spend the interest for parking money in a current account but wanted to feel safe. Back to you, Ravi.
I think maybe I give a slightly different perspective for the use of the audience. I mean, traditionally, any treasury investments are guiding principles are safety, liquidity, and return, and maybe in that order: first safety, then liquidity and return. While by and large we have followed that, but we have been dynamic enough to see what's right and appropriate for the business. So, for example, pre-COVID, we would have never invested or put cash into a dealer network. We would have never gone and put a joint venture to lift a strategic supplier up. So even though we believe that it's risky and there is a certain risk element, but then we say that if 60% or 70% of the capacity of the supplier is coming to you, then the risk assessment of that should be recalibrated in current times rather than what the previous old models were. So giving the overall guiding principles of safety, liquidity, and return, we have navigated on a much more dynamic basis to take business calls, to really say, how do you leverage balance sheet to really revive the business and to sustain and make the business thrive. So those are some of the calls that we have taken. Apart from extending our supplier financing network and credit facilities with our banks, because we hardly borrow, extending that at our interest rates to our supplier base. Those are some of the new things that we have done.
I think we have Ravi, probably some tech issue. Sophie, you want to comment? Yeah.
So I think Ravi has dropped out. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Can.
I think meanwhile we can have one of the poll questions because we skipped that earlier. Sophia, if we can have the third poll question that was put up, that was shared with you right now.
Sure, no problem. So the third poll question is about digital transformation. So the question is, what functions of the finance organization will be able to make the most of digital transformation? The first option is transactional accounting, P2P or A2P, financial accounting and taxation, treasury or corporate finance, and then finally, financial modeling and planning. So please vote now.
I can see Srini waiting to ask you all of the above.
I think while people are voting, any of you have any opinion? What do you think in your organizations is one thing that's going to transform digitally the most?
I mean, to respond to Anurag, I can only say, ye dil mange more. I mean, I would say financial modeling and planning more appropriate to current times, where on one side we have crisis, on the other side we have resilience, on the third angle perspective you have opportunities, and hence multiple scenarios, looking at probability analysis, and then able to take decisions very fast. So if you ask me today, I would put my bet on financial modeling and planning.
Okay, that's great. I think we have Ravi back now. Ravi, Sophia, meanwhile, can we have the results, please? Wow.
Yeah.
Transactional accounting.
That's what I thought would come out as the most popular one, because it again depends on what stage you are in the organization. Because modeling and planning, by the very nature of the kind of data which you're using, requires a lot of automation tools. And I think we covered that ground earlier, which is drilling down and actually looking at data and doing some prediction. Now, where transactional accounting, at least in India, some organizations have addressed that very well through shared service centers. And that's where the treasury is sitting, and that's where the maximum resources usually reside. So that, I think, is where the potential is. So it's coming out as 56% is no surprise. I think this is exactly it.
So, sorry, I got dropped off on this, but I think we've got like 5-7 minutes left. So one last question. I think CFOs are probably is one of the toughest roles to play right now in any organization. You're really at the center of the storm, trying to juggle multiple things. And I think, typical stereotype of a strong CFO is somebody who's very objective, data-driven, numbers-oriented. I think this crisis also requires a very high degree of empathy as a skill, right? That all of you need to bring in. So maybe just if, there are a lot of finance professionals on the call, one piece of advice that you would give to finance professionals or CFOs on discharging their role in the current situation, what would that be? And maybe we'll go Rajiv, Saugata, Anurag, Srini in that order.
Yeah, I would say we have a hard task, but empathy is something I would not lose sight of. Because usually a CFO is covered as not flexible, doesn't understand business, and sits in his own office. You want to change all of that. Go ahead, please.
So what would be your advice, Rajiv? Empathy or?
Absolutely. The current circumstances do deserve empathy for your supplier, for your channel, for your employees, right across. So within your constraints, you have to help.
Saugata, what would be your final advice?
Yeah. You see, the CFO has long been a co-pilot. I mean, those days of the the earliest Audi CFO is long gone. So having said that, I mean, CFOs understand business today. I think they are business managers like anybody else. So we have to think of the whole ecosystem, and especially in the current context, resilience means actually building redundancy in the system, even if it may not make sense in the next quarter. So that's what is coming out. It's teaching us that we build redundancy in the system. Although China may have been one country which is the most efficient, now what it's teaching us is that you shouldn't have had all your manufacturing in China. So we need to look at it holistically and think about what will make the business resilient for the medium term, which is at least 3 to 5 years out. And you'll find that you'll have to build partnerships and invest in them. You'll have to build relationships, invest in them. You'll have to build redundancies and invest in them. And that's the approach I would recommend.
Anurag, your thoughts?
Yeah, so Ravi, I would say, there's no choice to make here. It's very, very clear that it has to be trust, belief, and empathy. They are cornerstones and foundational, and you have to build on that. In today's times, more than any other time, that has to be the culture that you have to make sure that not just you demonstrate, but you also promote. I would say, the times will be tough. It will be a gloomy weather, not just tomorrow, for a fair bit of time. And we got to carry our weather with us. We cannot be biased by what we see outside. We have to look at the future and keep that empathetic view with our teams and keep them motivated looking at the future ahead.
Great. And Srini, keeping with your aircraft analogy, you get the task of landing the plane now with the final thought.
Well, landing the plane is easy, I would say, because in this, I just follow the instructions from my wife, who says, first listen. Yeah. So be patient and listen. So in COVID times, when there is issues and problems and chaos all around, you need to listen to your peers, your employees, your stakeholders, listen very carefully. The second thing which my wife says, be clear about what you want. Don't faff around. So we as CFOs have to be very clear to everybody as to what is expected out of them. And third is, I think, which all of us are quite good at, is to be decisive. To take the decision so that the organization gets the clarity as to what we need to do and how do we move forward. So every day, my wife is giving me a lecture to listen and be clear, and that's what I'm trying to replicate in my work.
Great, Srini. I think that was ageless wisdom. You know, it really captures everything one needs to do. Listen to your wife and follow what she says, and everything will be okay.
Nice.
But let me thank all of you. I will not attempt to synthesize or summarize what everybody has said. And the one advantage or disadvantage of getting disconnected from the Zoom call is that the Q&A window and the chat window disappears. So I don't even know now which questions are remaining unanswered. So I can't even pick those up. But I hope this was valuable. I personally found it very interesting and helpful. Let me hand it back to you, Jyoti, for closure.
So thanks, Ravi, and thank you, everyone. Just to first address the audience, all the questions which are unaddressed, we'll try to bother our panelists a little more and try to see if they can give us answers to those questions, and we'll send it across to you all. In terms of the discussion, I think it was a very, very engaging discussion. I already have my inbox with the comments like this was the best webinar in the entire lockdown, and will we get a recording? Yes, we will share the recording with you guys. I think thank you to all joining us. And as we are the recruitment company, I think one question still needs to pop up. Sophia, can we have that?
Yeah. So the final question we have for all of you is, when are you going to make your next critical hire? A very interesting question that, as a Michael Page, we want to know and get your sentiment on. So is that you're still making critical hires, or after 3 months, as we're not completely back to normal, or after after our expansion plan becomes clear, and final option is only after COVID scenario ends, then we'll take a call on further hiring.
So I think till people answer, can I go across the table, starting with Rajiv? Rajiv, what are you all doing at Cummins?
Hiring is not going to be the norm. It's a very critical hire, we will do it.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, that's not engaging us.
Okay, what about you, Sogata?
Yeah, so while generally hiring is stopped, critical hires will always happen, because critical is critical. So to answer that question is critical hires will happen by exception. But generally now hiring is stopped, and we are kind of reorganizing the organization to see how we can deploy resources in the best possible way. But critical will carry on.
Great. What about you, Anurag?
So maybe the situation is a little different for me. Critical hiring certainly will never stop. But we are actually on a little bit of a hiring effort right now, because we've done 2 strong transformations. We are moving work on our technology side from multiple sites around the world to Bangalore. And then we are moving work from our finance teams around the world to Pune. So there are 2 streams of hiring which will be pretty high, but that may be unique to us.
And what about you, Srini?
Well, I think we are not downsizing, but we are right-sizing the company. So where we need future skills, new competencies, we are hiring. So for example, our CIO role is open and we are on the search. So Michael Page, here's an opportunity. But I think we are looking at recruiting the right people for future competencies and future skills that we have.
Sure. I think Ravi, even you can answer that question for us. Are you still hiring?
We are still hiring.
Great. Okay, I think thank you everyone. It was a great discussion. Thank you for taking out time. If you have any questions or if you want to know anything, please drop an email to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, please.
Thank you.